It was one of those days that seemed to blend into the rest. The kind of day where you go through the motions, not expecting much to change. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my lukewarm coffee and scrolling through my emails, when a subject line caught my eye. "You deserve to know." I clicked on it more out of curiosity than anything else. The email was anonymous, with a cryptic message that read, "Look closely before it's too late," followed by a photo of Grant, my husband, with a woman I didn't recognize. They were at a cafe, leaning in close, sharing a moment that looked far too intimate for my comfort. My heart skipped, then raced, as if trying to catch up with the reality that was unfolding before me. My name is Mabel, and up until that moment, I believed I had a pretty good handle on my life. I'm a dental hygienist, and I like to think I'm pretty good at reading people. But this felt like a betrayal I never saw coming. I stared at the screen, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and disbelief. Grant and I had been together for over a decade, and while things weren't perfect, I never imagined this. I decided to confront him that evening. As he walked through the door, I tried to act normal, but my hands shook slightly as I handed him a glass of wine. He took it, kissed my cheek, and asked about my day. I could barely focus on the small talk, my mind fixated on the email. "Grant," I said, trying to sound casual, "I got an interesting email today." He looked up from his phone, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "Oh, from who?" "That's the thing," I replied, watching his face closely. "It was anonymous, but it had a picture of you with someone I don't know." His reaction was immediate, a flicker of something, was it guilt or surprise, crossed his face before he composed himself. "Mabel, you know how these things are. Probably just some spam or a scam. You can't trust everything you see online." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But there was something in his tone, something evasive, that made my stomach twist. "And the woman in the picture?" He shrugged, too nonchalantly. "Probably someone from work. You know how it is with clients." I nodded, but inside, my doubt was growing. Grant's family was wealthy, with a legacy steeped in power and control. I'd always felt a bit like an outsider, especially around his father, Walter, who had this way of making everyone feel small. But Grant had always been my anchor in that world. Now, that anchor felt like it was slipping away. Later that night, as he slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a storm of questions. Was this just a misunderstanding? Or was there something more, something dangerous, lurking beneath the surface? I thought of Hazel, our niece, who had come to live with us after her parents, Clark and Fiona, passed away. She was a bright kid, too smart for her own good sometimes, and she had already been through so much. I couldn't let her get caught up in whatever this was. I had to protect her. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. I started with Grant's office, looking for anything that might explain the photo. It felt wrong, like I was invading his privacy, but I had to know. As I sifted through papers, I found something odd, financial documents that hinted at a secret trust fund. It was a small discovery, but it felt like the tip of an iceberg. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone I could trust, someone who could help me navigate this tangled web. My mind immediately went to Nora, my best friend and confidant. She was pragmatic and no-nonsense, the kind of person who could see through the fog of emotions and get to the heart of the matter. As I closed the door to Grant's office, I felt a chill run down my spine. Whatever this was, it was bigger than I had imagined, and I had a feeling it was just the beginning. I glanced at my phone, the anonymous email still open. There was no sender, no trail to follow. But the message was clear. Look closely before it's too late. I was already in too deep to turn back now. The truth, whatever it was, had to be uncovered. For Hazel, for myself, and maybe even for Grant. The question was, how far was I willing to go to find it? The next morning, I decided to visit Hazel at Walter and Vivian's estate. It was something I did often, but today felt different, charged with a tension I couldn't quite place. As I drove up the long, winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into enemy territory. The estate was as imposing as ever, a testament to Walter's success and, perhaps, his need to project power. Vivian greeted me at the door, her smile as polished as the marble floors. "Mabel, darling, how lovely to see you," she said, her eyes scanning me with the precision of a hawk. I couldn't help but wonder what she was searching for. "Hi, Vivian. Is Hazel around?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "She's in the garden," Vivian replied, her tone clipped. "She's been spending a lot of time there lately." I nodded, making my way through the house. The air was thick with unspoken words, a tension that clung to the walls like dust. As I stepped outside, I spotted Hazel sitting on a stone bench, her face buried in a book. She looked up as I approached, her expression brightening. "Aunt Mabel," she exclaimed, setting the book aside and running to me. I hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. "Hey, kiddo. How's everything going?" I asked, pulling back to look at her. She shrugged, a shadow passing over her features. "It's okay, I guess. Grandma and Grandpa have been acting weird." I frowned, kneeling down to her level. "Weird how?" Hazel hesitated, glancing back at the house. "It's like they're always watching me, like I'm part of some plan I don't know about." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Hazel, you know you can tell me anything, right?" She nodded, her eyes earnest. "I know. It's just, I miss Mom and Dad, and sometimes I feel like I'm just a piece in their game." I hugged her again, my heart aching for her. "You're not a piece, Hazel. You're family, and I'm going to make sure you're okay." As we sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Quinns were up to something. The anonymous email, the photo of Grant, the secret trust fund, they all pointed to a web of secrets I was only beginning to unravel. Later, as I was leaving, I ran into Walter in the hallway. He was a tall man, his presence commanding even in silence. "Mabel," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge that always put me on guard. "How's Hazel?" "She's doing okay," I replied, meeting his gaze. "But she misses her parents." Walter nodded, his expression inscrutable. "We all do. It's been hard on the family." I watched him carefully, searching for any sign of the man behind the mask. "I hope we can all work together to make things easier for her." "Of course," he said, a hint of something, was it sincerity or calculation, in his voice. "Family is everything." As I drove home, I replayed the conversation in my mind. Walter's words seemed genuine, but there was something about his demeanor that made me uneasy. I had a feeling that whatever was happening, it was far from over. Back at home, I found myself drawn to Grant's office again. The financial documents I had discovered nagged at me, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. As I sifted through papers, I stumbled upon something new, a list of transactions connected to a trust fund in Hazel's name. The amounts were staggering, far beyond anything I had imagined. This revelation threw everything into chaos. If Hazel was at the center of a financial scheme, it meant the stakes were higher than I thought. I needed to talk to Nora to get her take on all of this. That evening, I met Nora at a small cafe, the kind of place where you could talk without being overheard. As I laid out everything I had found, her expression shifted from concern to a steely determination. "Mabel, this is serious," she said, her voice low. "You need to be careful. If Walter and Vivian are involved, they won't take kindly to anyone interfering." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I know, but I can't just stand by and do nothing. Hazel deserves better." Nora reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Then we'll figure this out together. But you need to be smart about it. We can't let them know we're onto them." As I left the cafe, I felt a mix of fear and resolve. The Quinns were hiding something, and I was determined to uncover it. But the more I dug, the more dangerous it felt. I had to protect Hazel, and that meant taking risks I never anticipated. The question was, how far was I willing to go? And what would I find once I reached the bottom of this tangled mess? The days after my visit to the Quinn estate felt like walking on a tightrope. Every interaction with Grant was tinged with an unspoken tension, a dance around the elephant in the room. I was determined to protect Hazel, but the more I dug, the more I realized how tangled this web really was. Nora called me one afternoon with a lead. "Mabel, I think you need to hear this, she said, her voice urgent. I was talking to a friend who used to work in finance. They mentioned something about Clark and Fiona looking into Walter's business deals before their accident. A chill ran down my spine. You think it's connected? I don't know, but it seems too coincidental to ignore, Nora replied. Be careful, Mabel. This could be bigger than we thought. Her words echoed in my mind as I went through Fiona's belongings later that evening. I had avoided it for too long, fearing what I might find. As I sifted through her papers, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic.
A key.
My heart skipped a beat. It was a small, nondescript key, but it felt significant. I knew Fiona had secrets, but this was a tangible link to whatever she had been hiding. The key was a promise of answers, but it also felt like opening Pandora's box. The next day, I decided to talk to Grant. I needed to know where he stood in all of this. As he sat across from me at the kitchen table, I could see the weight of his family's legacy etched into his features. Grant, we need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I found something in Fiona's things. A key. He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. A key to what? I don't know yet, but I think it might be important, I replied, searching his face for any hint of recognition or guilt. Grant sighed, rubbing his temples. Mabel, you know how complicated my family is. Complicated doesn't begin to cover it, I said, frustration creeping into my voice. Hazel deserves to know the truth. We all do. He nodded, a shadow passing over his expression. I know. I don't want to lose you over this. His words hung in the air, a confession of sorts. I reached across the table, taking his hand. Then help me find out what really happened. As we sat there, I could feel the walls between us starting to crack, revealing the raw, vulnerable truth beneath. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. That evening, I decided to visit the bank and see what the key unlocked. As I stood in front of the safety deposit box, my hands trembled with anticipation and fear. I took a deep breath and turned the key. Inside, I found a stack of documents and a letter addressed to me. The documents detailed Walter's illegal real estate deals, a web of corruption that stretched far beyond what I had imagined. The letter, written in Fiona's familiar handwriting, was a plea for help, expressing her fears for her and Clark's safety. My heart pounded as I read her words, the enormity of the situation crashing down on me. Fiona had known the risks, yet she had tried to uncover the truth. And now, it was up to me to finish what she had started. I left the bank with a new sense of purpose, but also a growing fear of what might come next. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every turn a potential danger. Back at the house, I found Hazel in the living room, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop. She looked up as I entered, a question in her eyes. Hey, Aunt Mabel. Everything okay? She asked, her voice tentative. I forced a smile, trying to mask the turmoil inside. Yeah, just a long day. As I watched her return to her screen, I knew I couldn't let her down. I had to protect her from whatever darkness the Quinn legacy harbored. But with every step closer to the truth, the danger felt more real, more immediate. The stakes were higher than ever, and I was running out of time. The Quinns had secrets they would do anything to protect, and I was caught in the middle. But I couldn't turn back now. Not when Hazel's future depended on it. The question was, how much was I willing to risk to see justice served? And would I lose everything in the process? The days that followed my discovery at the bank were a blur of anxiety and determination. I felt like I was living on borrowed time, each moment a precarious balance between uncovering the truth and keeping Hazel safe. The documents and Fiona's letter weighed heavily on me, a constant reminder of the danger lurking within the Quinn family. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, poring over the documents once again, Grant walked in. His face was drawn, shadows under his eyes hinting at sleepless nights. He hesitated at the doorway, as if unsure of his place in the room. Mabel, we need to talk, he said finally, his voice tinged with a weariness that mirrored my own. I looked up, meeting his gaze. About what? He pulled out a chair and sat down, his hands fidgeting with a pen. I know about the trust fund. I found out about it a while ago, but I didn't know how to tell you. His admission hit me like a punch to the gut. You knew? And you didn't say anything? Grant sighed, running a hand through his hair. I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want to drag you into this mess. I watched him, trying to gauge his sincerity. What else are you hiding, Grant? He hesitated, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Walter's been grooming Hazel to take over someday. He wants to secure the family legacy through her. The revelation was a sucker punch. Hazel as the heir to Walter's empire? It was a future I hadn't considered, and one I wasn't sure she wanted. Does Hazel know? No, Grant replied, his voice heavy with regret. And I don't think she should. Not yet. I nodded, my mind racing with the implications. Hazel was just a child, thrust into a world of power and manipulation. I couldn't let her be used as a pawn in Walter's game. The next day, I met Nora for coffee, needing her pragmatic perspective. As I recounted Grant's confession, her expression shifted from concern to determination. Mabel, this changes everything. You need to get Hazel out of there before Walter tightens his grip, Nora said, her voice firm. I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me. But how? Walter's influence is everywhere. Nora leaned in, her eyes sharp. We need leverage. Something that will force Walter to back off. Her suggestion lingered in my mind as I drove home. I knew I had to act, but the path forward was fraught with uncertainty. The Quinns were powerful, and I was just one person trying to protect Hazel from a legacy she never asked for. That evening, as I sat with Hazel, I watched her laugh at something on her laptop, her innocence a stark contrast to the storm brewing around her. I knew I had to shield her from the darkness threatening to engulf us both. The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. My heart raced as I answered, half expecting another anonymous tip. But the voice on the other end was familiar. Mabel, it's Vivian, she said, her tone clipped. We need to talk. I agreed to meet her, curiosity and apprehension mingling in my chest. As I arrived at the estate, Vivian met me in the drawing room, her demeanor as polished as ever. Mabel, I know you've been digging into family matters, she began, her eyes narrowing. But you must understand, everything we do is for the family's future. I met her gaze, unflinching. And what about Hazel's future? Does she get a say in any of this? Vivian's expression softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through her usual facade. I care for Hazel, truly, but Walter is set in his ways. He believes this is what's best. Her words hung in the air, a confession wrapped in justification. It was clear Vivian was caught between loyalty and love, a struggle I knew all too well. As I left the estate, I realized the power dynamics were shifting. Vivian's uncertainty was a crack in Walter's armor, a potential ally in my fight for Hazel. But the path ahead was still uncertain, and every step felt like walking through a minefield. The stakes had never been higher, and I knew I had to act fast. Walter's plans for Hazel were a threat I couldn't ignore, and the clock was ticking. But with every revelation, my resolve grew stronger. I would protect Hazel, no matter the cost. The question was, could I outmaneuver Walter before it was too late? And what would be the price of victory in a game where the rules were constantly changing? With each passing day, the pressure mounted like a storm ready to break. The documents I had uncovered were a ticking time bomb, and I knew I had to act before the Quinns found a way to silence me. Every glance over my shoulder felt like a reminder that I was being watched, and every shadow seemed to whisper of danger. One evening, as I sat in the living room, the tension between Grant and me was palpable. He paced the floor, a caged energy simmering beneath his calm exterior. I could tell he was wrestling with his own demons, caught between loyalty to his family and the need to protect Hazel. Mabel, we need to decide what to do next, he said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was an urgency in his eyes. I nodded, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. We can't let Walter get away with this. but we need to be smart about it. Grant paused, his gaze fixed on the floor. What if we go to the authorities? Hand over the documents and let them handle it. The suggestion hung in the air, tempting in its simplicity. But I knew it wasn't that easy. Walter's influence was far-reaching, and a misstep could put Hazel in more danger. And what if Walter finds out before we can? He'll do anything to protect himself. Grant's jaw tightened, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. Then what do? We can't just sit here and wait for him to make the next move. I stood up, the restlessness propelling me into action. We need leverage. Something that will force Walter to back off. As I spoke, an idea took shape, a risky plan that could turn the tide in our favor. But it was a gamble, and the stakes were higher than ever. I glanced at Hazel, who was sprawled on the couch with her headphones on, oblivious to the storm raging around her. We need to get Hazel out of here, I said, my voice firm with resolve. Somewhere safe, where Walter can't reach her. Grant nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. I know a place. A cabin upstate. It's secluded and no one knows about it. The plan was set, but the execution was fraught with risk. We had to act quickly before Walter caught wind of our intentions. As the evening wore on, I packed a bag for Hazel, my hands shaking with the enormity of what we were about to do. The next morning, as we prepared to leave, there was a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat, fear and anticipation mingling in my chest. Grant opened the door to reveal Vivian, her expression a mix of concern and determination. Mabel, Grant, we need to talk, she said, her voice urgent. Walter's planning something. I don't know what, but you need to be careful. Her warning was unexpected, a glimmer of hope in the midst of chaos. Vivian, we need your help, I said, seizing the opportunity. We need to get Hazel to safety. Vivian hesitated, the conflict visible in her eyes. I want to help, but if Walter finds out, we'll handle Walter, Grant interjected, his voice steady. But Hazel needs to be away from here. Vivian nodded, a decision made. I'll stall Walter, give you time to get away. With Vivian's help, we had a chance. But as we loaded Hazel into the car, a new fear gripped me. What if this wasn't enough? What if Walter's reach extended further than we imagined? As we drove away from the house, the gravity of our actions settled over me. We were crossing a line, stepping into a world where the rules were dictated by power and influence. But for Hazel's sake, it was a risk we had to take. The road stretched out before us, a path fraught with uncertainty and danger. But with each mile, my resolve hardened. I would do whatever it took to protect Hazel, even if it meant confronting the darkness within the Quinn family. The question was, how far would Walter go to maintain his empire? And could we outmaneuver him before it was too late? The drive upstate was tense, the silence in the car heavy with unspoken fears. Hazel sat in the back seat, headphones on, oblivious to the gravity of our escape. Grant's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I watched the trees blur past, each mile feeling like a small victory against the storm we were fleeing. But as we neared the cabin, a sense of unease settled over me. We were stepping into the unknown, leaving behind the safety of familiarity for a refuge that felt both promising and perilous. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that Walter's reach extended further than we imagined. When we finally arrived, the cabin stood silent and secluded, surrounded by dense woods that offered both protection and a sense of isolation. Hazel bounded out of the car, eager to explore, while Grant and I unloaded the bags, our movements synchronized by necessity rather than comfort. As night fell, the weight of our situation pressed down on me. The cabin was a temporary sanctuary, but it couldn't shield us from the reality waiting beyond its walls. The documents I had found were a ticking time bomb, and Walter wouldn't rest until he regained control. Later, as Hazel slept upstairs, Grant and I sat in the dimly lit living room, the shadows casting long, looming shapes on the walls. The silence between us was thick, filled with the tension of unresolved questions and unspoken fears. We can't stay here forever, I said finally, my voice breaking the quiet. Walter won't stop until he finds us. Grant nodded, his expression grim. I know, but we need time to figure out our next move. I leaned back, exhaustion tugging at my bones. What if we don't have time? What if he's already closing in? Grant's gaze met mine, a flicker of determination in his eyes. We'll figure it out. We have to. His words were meant to reassure, but they only highlighted the precariousness of our situation. We were outmatched, a small family against a powerful empire, and the odds felt insurmountable. The next morning, a knock at the door shattered the fragile peace we had found. My heart leapt into my throat as I opened it, half expecting to see Walter's men. Instead, it was Nora, her face drawn with urgency. Mabel, you need to know something, she said, stepping inside. Walter's filed a missing persons report. He's using it to track you down. The revelation hit me like a punch, the walls of our sanctuary closing in. How long do we have? Not long, Nora replied, her voice laced with worry. You need to move and fast. As we scrambled to pack, the gravity of our situation became painfully clear. Walter was closing in, and our options were dwindling. Every plan we had seemed to unravel, leaving us with nothing but desperation and a dwindling sense of hope. In the chaos, Hazel approached me, her eyes wide with confusion. Aunt Mabel, what's happening? Why are we leaving? I knelt down, forcing a smile. We're going on adventure, sweetie. Somewhere safe. Her brow furrowed, skepticism in her gaze. But why do we have to hide? Her question pierced through my resolve, a reminder of the innocence we were trying to protect. Because we love you, Hazel, and we want to keep you safe. As we loaded the car once more, the reality of our situation settled over me like a heavy cloak. We were running out of time, and the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. But just as we were about to leave, the sound of an approaching car stopped us in our tracks. My heart pounded as a black sedan pulled up, the driver's door opening to reveal Walter, his expression as unyielding as ever. Mabel, Grant, he said, his voice carrying a weight of authority. We need to talk. His presence was a final twist, a reminder of the power he wielded and the danger we faced. As he approached, I felt the last threads of our plan unraveling, leaving us exposed and vulnerable. The confrontation was inevitable, and as Walter stood before us, I realized that our fight was far from over. We were at our lowest point, with everything to lose and no clear path to victory. The question was, how far were we willing to go to protect Hazel? And in the face of such overwhelming odds, could we find a way to turn the tide? Walter stood before us, his presence as commanding as ever, but there was an edge to his demeanor that hinted at desperation. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing, and I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was it, the confrontation I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Mabel, Grant, Walter began, his voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of steel. I understand your concerns, but this isn't the way to handle things. Grant stepped forward, his posture tense. And what is the way, Walter? To let you control Hazel's life, like you did with Clark and me? Walter's eyes flickered with something akin to regret, but he quickly masked it with resolve. I only want what's best for the family. And what about what's best for Hazel? I interjected, my voice firm. She deserves a future of her choosing, not one dictated by your ambitions. Walter's gaze shifted to me, his expression unreadable. You don't understand the pressures of maintaining a legacy. The sacrifices needed. I shook my head, frustration boiling over. Sacrifices? You mean like Fiona and Clark? How many more lives are you willing to ruin for the sake of your empire? Walter's face hardened, but there was a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. I never intended for things to go this far. But once you're in, it's hard to get out. The admission hung in the air, a crack in the armor of the man who had always seemed unbreakable. But I couldn't afford to let sympathy cloud my judgment. Not now. Then step aside, Walter, Grant said, his voice steady. Let us handle things. Let Hazel have the life she deserves. Walter hesitated, the weight of his past decisions visible in the lines etched on his face. And what if I refuse? The question was a challenge, a final test of our resolve. But before I could respond, Vivian appeared, her presence a calming counterpoint to Walter's intensity. "Walter, please," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "We've lost too much already. Let them go." Walter looked at her, a silent conversation passing between them. For a moment, it seemed as if he might relent, but then his gaze hardened once more. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I can't let everything I've built fall apart." The words were a catalyst, igniting the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface. But just as the situation seemed poised to spiral out of control, Hazel stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising clarity. "Grandpa, stop," she said, her eyes wide but determined. "I don't want to be a part of this. I just want to be a kid." Her words were simple but powerful, a reminder of what truly mattered. Walter's expression faltered, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the facade, a grandfather torn between ambition and love. The moment stretched, the air thick with anticipation. But then, unexpectedly, Walter sighed, the fight leaving him. "All right," he said quietly, the word carrying the weight of a lifetime of regrets. "All right." The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a fragile sense of relief. Walter's decision was a turning point, a step toward healing the rift that had torn our family apart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the clearing in twilight, I felt a sense of closure settling over me. The battle was over, and though the path ahead was uncertain, it was one we would navigate together. The confrontation had brought us face to face with the core themes of our journey: revenge, justice, and the power of family. In the end, it was love and understanding that had prevailed, offering a glimmer of hope for the future. As we turned to leave, Walter called out, his voice carrying a note of vulnerability I had never heard before. "Mabel, Grant, thank you." His gratitude was unexpected, a testament to the change that had begun to take root. And as we walked away, I knew that though the road ahead would be challenging, we were no longer alone. Together, we would forge a new path, one defined not by the shadows of the past, but by the promise of a brighter future. The days following the confrontation with Walter were a whirlwind of change and reflection. The cabin, once a temporary refuge, now felt like the beginning of a new chapter. As we settled back into our lives, I could sense the shift in the air, a lightness that had been absent for too long. Walter kept his word, stepping down and transferring control of the family assets to Grant. It was a decision that surprised many, but it was a testament to the impact of our confrontation. The empire Walter had built was now in the hands of someone determined to use it for good. One afternoon, as the sun cast a warm glow over the garden, I found Hazel sitting under a tree, her laptop balanced on her knees. She looked up as I approached, a smile lighting up her face. "Aunt Mabel, look," she exclaimed, pointing to the screen. "I'm designing a website for a school project." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile back. "That's amazing, Hazel. You're really talented." She shrugged, a hint of pride in her eyes. "I want to do something that helps people, like you and Uncle Grant." Her words touched something deep within me, a reminder of why we had fought so hard. Hazel's future was hers to shape, free from the shadows of the past. Later, as Grant and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, the silence between us was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding of what we had overcome. "You did it," Grant said softly, his gaze on the horizon. "You protected Hazel and changed everything." I shook my head, a smile playing on my lips. "We did it. Together." He reached for my hand, his touch grounding me in the moment. "I've been thinking about what comes next, how we can make things right." His words were a promise, a commitment to the path we had chosen. The legacy Walter had left was complex, but it was also an opportunity to build something new, something better. As the days turned into weeks, We worked to secure Hazel's trust fund, ensuring her future was safe and independent. Walter's decision to step back had set a ripple effect in motion, one that allowed us to redefine what family meant. Vivian, too, found her place in this new world. She visited often, her presence a reminder of the strength that lay in unity. The past couldn't be changed, but it could be learned from, and she was determined to be a part of Hazel's life in a way that mattered. One evening, as I sorted through the last of Fiona's belongings, I came across a letter I hadn't noticed before. It was addressed to me, written in Fiona's familiar script. "Mabel, if you're reading this, it means you've uncovered the truth," it began. "I always believed in the power of family to heal and transform. Protect Hazel, and remember that love is stronger than any legacy." Her words were a balm to my soul, a reminder of the journey we had taken and the strength we had found in each other. As I sat there, the letter in my hands, I realized that our story was one of redemption and transformation. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, guided by love and the promise of a brighter future. But even as we moved forward, a lingering question remained. What would we do with the power now in our hands? The answer lay not in the past, but in the choices we made each day, in the commitment to use our influence for good. In the end, the journey had been about more than just justice or revenge. It was about finding our way back to each other, about forging a path defined by love and resilience. As the sun set on our new life, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united by the bonds we had fought so hard to protect. And as Hazel joined us on the porch, her laughter ringing out into the evening, I knew that we had found something precious, a family bound not by secrets or power, but by the simple, enduring truth of love.